Be vigilant at all times and pray that you have the strength to stand before the Son of Man. As we move deeper into this month of November towards the end of ordinary time and the beginning of Advent, the Church in a particular way at this time calls us to focus on the last things, namely heaven, hell, death, and judgment. Those things our human nature, our fallen human nature, tends to run away from. Heaven, hell, death, and judgment. Celebrating All Saints' Day on November 1st and followed by the commemoration of all the faithful departed on November 2nd. We're called in special mind to judge our lives in light of eternity. And in the gospel today that the Church proposes to us, Jesus talking about the end times and that call for us to read the signs of the times and remain vigilant always for the coming of the Son of Man. I think for the past year or so, I've really been drawn to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, numbers 675 through 678. And it's a really fascinating part of the Catechism. It talks about what must precede the coming of the Lord at the end of time. What's going to happen first? And in a nutshell, what it says is something to the effect of, before the Lord comes again in glory at the end of time, there will be a great apostasy. Great apostasy. What is apostasy? Apostasy is a departing from the faith, or departing from those essential truths of the faith. We, in no doubt, live in a time of great apostasy. Whether or not it is the great apostasy or not, God knows. But we definitely live in a time of great apostasy. We see entire conferences of bishops questioning the most basic, fundamental truths about human nature and about God. We see very confusing and ambiguous statements from all levels of authority in the Church and a very selective justice that is exercised. All of these things, and at the end of the day, God alone judges. It's not our job to judge. We pray for those in authority over us, and we do our best to form our conscience faithfully and to follow our conscience faithfully. And the Church, beautifully throughout the history of the Church, has promoted the primacy of conscience. We could think of great saints like Saint John Fisher and Saint Thomas More, who went to their deaths rather than compromise their conscience. Saint John Fisher himself, the only bishop in England who did not take an oath of fidelity to the king. In other words, the only bishop who did not apostatize, and it quite literally cost him his head. Great martyrs of conscience that the Church claims proudly for her own. And we in our own time, no doubt, also are called to be martyrs of conscience, whether or not the Lord will call us to a bloody martyrdom or a white martyrdom, of maybe being ostracized, maybe losing a job, maybe some other way of feeling uncomfortable in society or like a stranger. But to really be a Catholic today, no doubt by following our conscience faithfully, we're going to feel like strangers in our own homes. And I think we all go through that from time to time. I think if we didn't, there'd be something kind of wrong with us almost. Because to be Catholic now, if you're not having a hard time, I think you're doing it wrong. But the Catechism goes on through numbers 675 through 678, and quite beautifully the Catechism says that the Church will ultimately triumph in history not through a gradual ascendancy, that is, not becoming more and more powerful or influential in the sight of the world, having more bling, more sway in politics or any of that in the culture wars. Rather, the Church will eventually just kind of seem to crumble and almost as if die. Of course, we know the Lord's promise to St. Peter that upon that rock of Peter, he's built his church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. But nevertheless, the Church herself will indeed go through her own sort of passion, and from the outside look as if she were dead. And the Catechism goes on to say that the Church, when she triumphs, it will be done in such a way that it will be unmistakable, that it will be no doubt an act of God himself, which makes the Church triumph. How exactly that's going to go down or what it's going to look like, your guess would be as good as mine. But I think when we see all the very discouraging things all around us, all the confusing statements and ambiguous thoughts that are put out there, witnesses that are anything but credible, when we feel so discouraged as to want to abandon ship, the bark of Peter, I think those numbers from the Catechism, 675 through 678, pack a particularly powerful punch. The little verse we hear before the gospel today, be vigilant at all times and pray that you have the strength to stand before the Son of Man. I think like a good patron maybe for our own times as well would be somebody like St. John the Evangelist. I have a special love for him because he was the patron of my first parish assignment, but St. John, we look at the night when the apostles themselves, if you will, became priests, the night of the institution of the Eucharist, the night of the Last Supper. Every single one of them, except John, ran away from the Lord. John ran away the night that Jesus was arrested, but he was there with the Blessed Mother at the foot of the cross. He was the only one to show up when things were pretty darn bleak. But St. John was there. And, he's not St. Peter. He doesn't have that same authority that Jesus gave to Peter. And John recognizes that all throughout the Gospels. He's not trying to, grasp onto worldly power. But like how John is the beloved. John is the one who stands in place of the church when Jesus entrusts his mother to him, and indeed, by extension, to all of us. John, who is that faithful servant. I think in particularly the difficult moments in which we live, as if it seems the church is indeed going through her own sort of passion, and no doubt she's gone through her own passions in the past, but in this particular trying time we find ourselves in, I like to call to mind John the Evangelist, how he is faithful and steadfast. He holds the line, he stands at the foot of the cross. He doesn't run away. How much more beautiful of a testimony that is to his friendship with the Lord. No doubt when he eventually was called to his eternal reward, how those words, well done, good, faithful servant, must have rang so beautifully true for John. And I think in those moments, when we feel discouraged, when we feel we just want to give up, when we feel like we can't take it one more, or why am I going through those moments of feeling ostracized from family members and friends? Why do I still bother to be Catholic? To judge our own lives and the little trying moments we find ourselves in and day out in light of eternity. In light of eternity, I think this whole world is just like that. This whole world goes by so fast. I think I kind of realized that more and more as a priest when I would deal with elderly folks who would still kind of almost be in disbelief that they were no longer 18 years old. And they would honestly look at me and say, I don't know where the time went. I don't know where the time went. It all went so fast. And they still have this young heart within them, and how their whole lives pass by. Yeah, no doubt with the real passing of years, but, it just kind of goes. I'm kind of amazed as a priest. It feels like time is on like a fast-forward machine. It's like days just kind of blend into weeks and months and years, and it feels like this whole year in particular just flew by so fast, and I can hardly believe we're in the middle of November already. But whenever the Lord calls us to our eternal reward, at the end of our lives, whenever and however that looks, to be able to stand before him with a clear conscience and to say, I was with you, I stood there when things were tough, with all my faults and failures, all my weaknesses and sins, but relying on your mercy and holding fast to you and your mother. How beautiful it would be to hear the Lord say to us, despite all the scandals we see all around us, at the end of our lives, when we stand before him completely naked, before truth himself, our consciences laid completely bare, to hear him say, well done, good and faithful servant. And to see the little trials we go through in light of that, I think they all kind of fade away like the morning fog. So we pray for that grace to be vigilant at all times, to read the signs of the times through the lens of faith, and to hold fast to the cross, especially when it looks most ugly, most gruesome, most particularly repulsing, so that when we come to the end of our lives, we too can hear the Lord say to us, by his grace and mercy, well done, good and faithful servant.